Somewhere between the pages of an ancient text and the aisle of your local grocery store, something got lost. Long before nutrition labels, before supplement aisles, before anyone had ever heard the word probiotic, people were eating meals that kept them alive through famine, war, exile, and desert wandering. And they weren't guessing. Generation after generation, they were refining exactly what worked. The Bible isn't a cookbook, but scattered across its pages are meals so specific, so deliberately described, that modern researchers keep circling back to them. Not because they're mystical, because they hold up. Today we're going through 10 of these meals, starting with the ones you've probably never thought twice about, and ending with a single verse where God doesn't just bless a land, He names exactly what grows on it, food by food. Stick around for number 4, because it's the meal a wild-eyed prophet in the desert survived on, and it turns out he was living on one of the most efficient combinations of protein and antibacterial compounds available anywhere in nature. Let's start at number 10. Number 10. The red lentil stew that cost a birthright. In Genesis, Jacob is standing over a pot of stew when his brother Esau stumbles in from the field, starving, and trades his entire inheritance for a bowl of it. The stew is described simply as red, made from lentils. It sounds almost too plain to matter, but look closer and this is one of the most efficient survival meals in the ancient Near East. Lentils are a complete nutritional package on their own. They're loaded with plant protein, they're one of the richest plant sources of iron available, and they carry a type of fiber that slows digestion, keeps blood sugar stable, and feeds the bacteria living in your gut. For someone who had been working outdoors all day, a bowl of lentil stew wasn't a snack. It was refueling at a cellular level. What makes red lentils specifically interesting is how quickly they cook down and how easily the body absorbs what's inside them once they're softened. Unlike whole lentils, the red variety breaks apart into a smooth, almost creamy stew, which makes the nutrients inside far more accessible. Pair that with onions and garlic, both staples of the region, and you add compounds that support circulation and immune defense on top of everything the lentils are already doing. Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of this because, in that moment, his body was telling him something ancient civilizations understood instinctively. When you are truly depleted, plain food built the right way can matter more than almost anything else you own. Number 9. Bread and fish by the Sea of Galilee. Multiple times across the Gospels, meals built around barley bread and fish appear at pivotal moments, feeding crowds, feeding disciples, closing out an entire narrative on a beach at sunrise. It's easy to read past this as simply what was available near a lake. But the pairing itself deserves attention. Fish from the Sea of Galilee, historically types like tilapia and carp, are lean sources of complete protein and contain meaningful amounts of omega-3 fatty acids, the same fats modern cardiologists spend entire careers recommending for heart and brain health. Omega-3s are linked to lower inflammation throughout the body, better cognitive function, and reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. In a population without any of that terminology, fish from those waters was simply what people reached for when they needed strength that lasted. Barley bread, the bread of ordinary people rather than the wealthy, brings something fish alone can't: beta-glucan fiber, one of the most well-documented compounds for lowering cholesterol and steadying blood sugar after a meal. Together, the pairing checks almost every box a modern dietitian would ask for: lean protein, healthy fat, slow-digesting carbohydrate, and fiber, all from 2 ingredients pulled straight from a lakeshore. It's worth noticing that this exact combination reappears again and again in the text. Not because the writers were obsessed with fish, because it worked, meal after meal, for people who needed real, sustained energy to keep walking. Number 8. Locusts and wild honey in the wilderness. John the Baptist lived in the desert on locusts and wild honey, and for a long time this detail got treated as a strange footnote, evidence of an eccentric ascetic living on the edge of survival. Modern nutritional analysis tells a different story. Locusts, still eaten today across parts of the Middle East and Africa, are extraordinarily protein-dense, often containing more protein by weight than beef, along with meaningful amounts of iron, zinc, and healthy fats. For someone living entirely off the land with no access to livestock or farmland, insects were one of the most efficient protein sources available, requiring no cultivation and no storage. Wild honey adds something locusts can't provide alone: fast-acting natural sugars for immediate energy, along with trace enzymes and antimicrobial compounds. Raw honey has documented antibacterial properties, and it's been used for wound care and preservation for thousands of years across dozens of separate ancient cultures, independently arriving at the same conclusion. Put those two together and you get a meal that is almost absurdly efficient. dense protein for tissue repair and sustained strength, paired with rapid release energy and natural antimicrobial support, built entirely from what the desert itself provided. John wasn't suffering through his diet. By the numbers, he may have been eating one of the more nutritionally complete diets available to anyone in that region at that time. Number 7. Milk and honey. The Promised Land is described over and over as a land flowing with milk and honey. It's become such a familiar phrase that most people never stop to ask why those two things specifically became shorthand for abundance and blessing. Milk, from goats and sheep in most of that region, delivers complete protein, calcium, and fat in a single source, everything needed to sustain muscle, bone density, and basic cellular repair. In a world without refrigeration and unreliable food storage, an animal that could be milked daily represented one of the most stable, renewable food sources a family could have. Honey brought concentrated, shelf-stable energy that didn't spoil, along with the antimicrobial properties already mentioned. Together, milk and honey form what is essentially a complete micro-meal: protein and fat for structure, natural sugar for energy, calcium for bone strength, and documented antibacterial compounds working in the background the entire time. Describing a land as flowing with these two things wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was a description of nutritional security in a world where most people lived one bad harvest away from real hunger. A land that reliably produced milk and honey was a land where children grew, where bones stayed strong, and where illness had less room to take hold. Number 6. Boaz's field meal of parched grain and wine. In the book of Ruth, Boaz invites Ruth to sit with his workers and hands her roasted grain along with bread dipped in wine vinegar. It's a quiet, almost throwaway detail in a much larger story about loyalty and provision. But it describes a specific ancient practice: roasting fresh grain over fire before it was even fully dried, a method that changed both its flavor and its nutrition. Parching grain breaks down some of its outer structure, making the starches inside easier to digest and the nutrients more accessible than eating it raw. It was, in effect, a form of pre-digestion done with fire rather than time. For laborers working long hours in the field, this mattered. They needed energy they could access quickly, not grain that would sit heavy and slow. The wine vinegar for dipping the bread served a purpose beyond flavor. Fermented and acidic, it would have helped preserve the bread in the heat and, based on what's now understood about acidic foods, likely slowed the rate at which sugars from the bread entered the bloodstream, smoothing out energy release across the afternoon rather than delivering it all at once. This was a field worker's meal, built for stamina rather than indulgence. And it's easy to miss that the person handing it out, Boaz, was demonstrating something specific. Real provision isn't about extravagance. It's about giving someone exactly what their body needs to keep going. Number 5. Bitter herbs and unleavened bread at Passover. Every Passover meal centers on a specific, deliberate pairing: unleavened bread made without yeast, and bitter herbs, traditionally horseradish or bitter lettuce. The symbolism is well known, representing the hardship of slavery in Egypt. What's less discussed is what these two foods were actually doing physiologically. Unleavened bread, flat bread made quickly without fermentation time, digests differently than leavened bread. Without the gas produced by yeast, it's denser and slower to break down, providing a steadier, longer-lasting source of energy rather than a quick spike. Bitter herbs are where this meal gets genuinely interesting from a modern standpoint. Bitter compounds, found in foods like horseradish, dandelion greens, and bitter lettuce, stimulate the production of digestive enzymes and bile before the rest of the meal even arrives. This is a principle that's resurfaced in modern nutrition circles under the label of bitters, consumed specifically to prepare the digestive system for what's coming. Long before anyone understood the mechanism, ancient communities built an entire ritual meal around eating something bitter first. Horseradish specifically contains compounds with documented antimicrobial effects, offering a layer of protection against foodborne pathogens in an era with none of the food safety standards we take for granted today. A meal meant to commemorate suffering turned out, almost incidentally, to be built around genuine digestive preparation and microbial defense. Number 4. Manna and quail in the wilderness. For 40 years, the Israelites in the wilderness are described as surviving primarily on manna, a substance that appeared each morning, described as resembling small white seeds with a taste like wafers made with honey. Periodically, quail supplemented this, providing a rare source of animal protein. Manna's exact identity has been debated for centuries, with some researchers pointing to a substance secreted by certain desert-scale insects that feed on tamarisk trees, which produces a sugary, carbohydrate-rich residue collected by local populations even into modern times. Whatever its precise source, the text describes it functioning as a dependable daily carbohydrate, providing the caloric base an entire migrating population needed to keep moving across brutal terrain. Quail meat filled a different gap entirely. Complete protein, B vitamins, and iron, none of which a carbohydrate-based diet alone could provide. The pairing of a stable daily carbohydrate with periodic protein additions mirrors exactly what modern nutritional science identifies as necessary for sustained physical performance under extreme conditions: energy from carbohydrates paired with protein for tissue maintenance and repair. What's remarkable is the discipline embedded in the instructions surrounding manna. Gather only what's needed for the day, don't hoard it, don't let it spoil. Functionally, this created a built-in structure against overeating and food waste, forcing a population to eat exactly what their bodies required, no more, no less, meal after meal, for 4 decades. Number 3. Raisin cakes and fig cakes carried into battle. When David's men are exhausted and starving during their pursuit of the Amalekites, they come across an abandoned Egyptian servant and revive him with bread, water, and 2 specific items: a cake of raisins and a cake of pressed figs. These weren't random rations. They were the ancient equivalent of an energy bar, engineered by trial and error over centuries to be dense, portable, and shelf-stable. Raisins, dried grapes, concentrate the same natural compounds found in fresh grapes into a much smaller volume, alongside a hit of quick-digesting natural sugar for rapid energy replenishment. Dried, they don't spoil quickly, they don't need refrigeration, and they pack easily for travel, exactly what soldiers on a multi-day pursuit would have needed. Pressed fig cakes brought a different but complementary profile. Dense fiber, along with magnesium, potassium, and calcium, minerals that get depleted rapidly through physical exertion and sweat. Figs are also naturally high in a compound that supports smooth digestive function, which mattered enormously for men living for days at a time on preserved, calorie-dense rations with little fresh food. The unnamed servant, found starving and near collapse, is described as reviving specifically after eating these 2 foods along with bread. It reads almost like a documented case study: dense natural sugar plus mineral-rich fiber, restoring a body that had gone days without real nourishment. Number 2. Bread and broiled fish on the shore at dawn. After the resurrection, in one of the final scenes of John's Gospel, Jesus meets his disciples on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and prepares a breakfast of bread and fish cooked over a charcoal fire. It's a quiet domestic scene tucked into one of the most significant narratives in the entire text, and it echoes the same combination that appears earlier during the feeding of the multitudes. Fish cooked simply over open coals retains nearly all of its protein and healthy fat content, with none of the nutrient loss that comes from heavy processing or deep frying. Broiling over fire was, functionally, one of the cleanest cooking methods available in the ancient world, preserving the omega-3 content that made fish from that region so valuable in the first place. Bread again provided the steady carbohydrate base, and together the meal delivered exactly what a group of exhausted, likely malnourished men needed after a night of hard physical labor on the water. Protein for muscle repair, healthy fat for sustained energy and brain function, and carbohydrate to replenish what had been burned overnight. There's something worth sitting with here. Across the entire text, this same simple combination, fish and bread, keeps reappearing at moments of provision, restoration, and renewal. It wasn't a coincidence born of geography alone. It was, quite literally, one of the most nutritionally complete meals people in that region had consistent access to. Number 1. The 7 species named in a single verse. Deuteronomy chapter 8 describes the promised land, and instead of speaking in vague terms about fertility and abundance, the text becomes exact. It names 7 specific foods: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olive oil, and date honey. For thousands of years, this list has been read as a description of a fertile, well-watered region. That reading holds up, but laid out together and examined as a single nutritional system, something else becomes visible. Wheat and barley provide the foundation, complex carbohydrates paired with protein and, in barley's case specifically, one of the highest concentrations of cholesterol-lowering beta-glucan fiber found in any grain on Earth. Grapes contribute a dense concentration of polyphenols, plant compounds tied to cardiovascular protection and cellular repair, most heavily concentrated in the skin. Figs supply magnesium, potassium, and calcium, minerals the grains alone don't provide in meaningful amounts, along with a form of soluble fiber that supports gut bacteria. Pomegranates bring one of the highest antioxidant concentrations of any fruit studied, along with compounds that the gut converts into anti-inflammatory agents once digested. Olive oil, eaten generously rather than sparingly, delivers monounsaturated fat that makes the fat-soluble nutrients in everything else on this list dramatically more absorbable. It also contains a naturally occurring compound shown in published research to inhibit some of the same inflammatory pathways targeted by common anti-inflammatory medications. A genuinely striking finding for something that was simply poured over daily meals. And date honey. The concentrated syrup pressed from dates rather than the honey of bees provided rapid, reliable energy alongside fiber, potassium, and trace minerals that buffered against the blood sugar spikes refined sugar would later cause. Individually, each of these foods is well studied and well understood. What's harder to dismiss is how they function together. The mineral gaps left by the grains are filled by the fruits. The fat-soluble compounds in the olive oil unlock nutrients from everything else on the list. The fiber from nearly every item on it feeds the same population of gut bacteria now understood to influence everything from immune function to inflammation throughout the entire body. Nobody in that era could have explained bioavailability or gut microbiota. They didn't need to. They watched, across generations, what happened to communities that ate this way consistently, and they wrote it down as a description of blessing, because that's genuinely what it produced. 10 meals, spanning wilderness survival, battlefield rations, family tables, and a single verse naming an entire nutritional system in 7 words. None of them required a laboratory. None of them needed a modern degree to design. They were built the way most real knowledge is built, slowly, through generations of people paying close attention to what actually worked, and passing it down before anyone had a word for nutrition science at all. If one of these meals stood out to you, try building it into your week and see how your body responds. And if this kind of deep dive into ancient wisdom is something you want more of, stay close, because there's a lot more worth uncovering.